There he is.
There he is.
Yeah, there you go. I'm going to go off, Greg, JP, and Meg. This is your show. Frictionless payments. How's the world changing?
Wow, that's a big, wide open subject. I guess Meg or Greg, you want to lunge in head first?
Hang on just 1 second. Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah, perfectly.
Just want to repeat that question. I just came back to the restroom. What was the question on frictionless payments?
What are our views on trends and what's happening and what the future holds is how I interpret the question.
Correct.
Sure. So for us, I mean, frictionless payments is like today we have the bank rails and the card rails. We all know that they're slow, they're expensive. In our future vision of the world, we're looking for things to be all on-us transactions, and there's two models for that. There's the kind of the custodial WeChat model, which could be the Uphold model, which is everybody's on a custodial ledger that basically operates 24/7, and then there's the DeFi version, which is even more radical, which is that people are on a protocol and they're basically doing it as on-us transactions, and each of those can be, faster, potentially cheaper than the current friction-laden banking and card rails that we've inherited today. And so the question is, like in a place like China, they're already doing 7 or 8 times the volume on us rails that MasterCard and Visa are doing. We're behind, but to me, China looks like the future. That's a centralized model that could be that version or a decentralized version. Part of our investment and excitement about Uphold is for that, and part of our investment and excitement in Apto is that Apto bridges. With Apto, you could do payments, and the authorization shouldn't really matter whether it's going through the card network or eventually going through QR codes. The only question is how long are we going to take to get to the Holy Grail? We often describe the Holy Grail as being at a poker table where the chips never go back to the window. Everything you do is at the poker table, and when you're done with that day, you take the chips and you pay for your hotel room and your meal, and you never have to cash out. Everything's using that same ledger as the ledger they have at the poker table. All you need to do is see whether that person sitting across from you or a short stack, it's that transparent, it's that fast. Let me stop there.
That's great. So with Meg, I'll jump in unless you want to. So with Meg's company, we collaborated on issuing a debit card in the U.S. that we think was the first multi-asset crypto-enabled true debit card as opposed to a prepayment card. And to Greg's point, it's sort of a I don't want to say transitional, but it takes many steps to get to the future that Greg's envisioning of entirely on us payments, right? There's a 5-party payment system. All the banks and card companies are a part of that. PayPal is a part of that sprung up to deal with the new reality of mom and pop merchants selling things through the context of eBay. So things go through phases. And one component of it is the rails, but another one that I was just speaking with someone earlier today about that I think has yet to settle, and we're in very interesting times, is the actual underlying unit of account. Because all of a sudden, if you think that one of the mega trends that's happening is sort of the ends of central banking and the ends of government's ability to monopolize the medium through which local commerce is conducted, it brings into account what are people going to spend. So with this debit card we launched in partnership with Meg, in theory, you could go to a cash machine. You could be waiting for the waiter to come to your dinner table, and at the last minute you could say, oh geez, I just saw that XRP went up 30%, or gold went up, or Apple stock even went up, and in 2 seconds on your phone you can switch the source of what's going to be used to pay out of your card, and that's an amazing thing, because not 5 years ago you only had one choice with what you were going to pay with. It was, if you're American, U.S. dollars, and more or less it was U.S. dollars even if you were traveling abroad. and you get nailed with a 2.5% foreign currency conversion fee. But again, when we're in a world today, and I think what we've seen in the crypto markets is this sort of head fake that people are buying the transitory inflation story. And I suppose if you're an American on the receiving end of a $6 trillion infrastructure package, that's not a bad deal. But if you're a dollarized economy outside of the United States, you're going to be rethinking how much you like the dollar, right? Because you're no longer necessarily the direct beneficiary of the policies that determine its relative worth. And so more and more and more, I think, maybe it's not Bitcoin because Bitcoin's too volatile and it's sort of settled in as digital gold, but somebody's going to come up with a currency that isn't a nationalized currency that, is part timber and part oil and part carbon credits or whatever. And that's an entirely different dimension to a future of payments and wallets. Is what is the unit of account that's going to be, the real global stable coin, not something affixed to a government currency or a specific commodity. So anyway, I'll stop there and hand over to Meg.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Thanks, JP. I'm proud to say that to give ourselves a little bit of an ecosystem plug here, I actually paid for dinner with XRP tonight, right? So to JP's point, it's absolutely what's coming, and we facilitate it. Others will continue to push the envelope in this direction, and hopefully we're part of the story in making the future happen sooner rather than later. I think the perspective I was going to add on frictionless payments or where the trends are headed, I would just reflect that the pandemic really accelerated growth of these digital payment wallets and Apple Pay and Google Pay. As someone who lives in the US, I can say that it's a bit embarrassing how far behind we were Europe. For many years here in Europe, you could leave and travel and go about your day with just your phone because Apple Pay worked everywhere. Every merchant was obligated to have a POS that had NFC capability, and you could pay with any card in your Apple Wallet. That just wasn't the norm in the US, and the fact that we're catching up rapidly is really exciting. I think consumer demand for better experiences is a new thing that's happening in the US, and whether it's COVID or the pandemic or anything else, I think we get to benefit as payments geeks and folks looking to move this industry forward. We're the beneficiaries. Makes our job easier.
Absolutely. Kareem, is there a specific direction you'd like us to take it in?
Yes. Talk about how your experience in the background of what's happening with platforms that are dealing with currencies, what's happening with networks, and how you actually evaluate companies that you get involved with, and with Uphold, obviously, the wonderful platform that you've built, and how that's working, and what are people looking at, and what's most interesting to them.
Sure. So keeping it sort of within the realm of payments, we're partners with Coil. We're partners with Brave. There is, there's a Web3 movement afoot that gets to the place where Greg was describing the future. And so one element of our strategy is to attempt to stay at the fore of that. To Meg's comment about how COVID changed things, obviously people started speculating a lot more, which was manifest in the equities markets, the crypto markets, and even in sports betting when sports returned. E-commerce has, it was similarly benefited. I believe there was a statistic in the earlier part of COVID where in the first 6 or 9 months of COVID, e-commerce grew the equivalent of the prior 11 years. I think now that summer's here in the north and people are vaccinated, that's reversing a little bit. But it makes one very cognizant of the fact that if e-commerce is the inexorable future, then the equivalent of Fifth Avenue and Rodeo Drive in e-commerce is a browser, and so upholds early partnership with Brave, and I believe we were the first people to put wallet balances into a browser. You don't have to connect too many dots to where you get to that on-us future that Greg's alluding to. If you're using a browser and going to an e-commerce site, pretty soon you'll be at a place where you can click on the item you want, elect the unit of account you want, and that merchant is presumably not paying 2 or 3%. They're paying a lot less. It's probably a different chargeback equation, and the settlement periods are probably more efficient. So that's one direction. The other one we pay attention to is what's the potential for personal hardware storage devices and using those as some tool for payments and trading in the future, where you have one piece of hardware, you carry around your assets, your credentials, your financial identity, and maybe you can use that again to make payments that also bypass the traditional five-party system. So those are two specific areas we're paying attention to. In the meantime, the card companies seem to be the perfect bridge between the two. Obviously, there's a ton of card-related infrastructure, out there, and so we acquired last year a European card company. We are planning on rolling out debit card programs in lots of new geographies, and that'll be the sort of transitional emphasis for a while.
Thank you, JP and Greg. Meg, to you, we seem to see U.S. sort of lagging behind in the sort of the banking infrastructure, the neobanks. We see Europe taking over in that aspect a lot. And I know Aptos is building a program that makes this easier. What are your thoughts on the U.S. and their future compared to what's happening in Europe and the other developing nations that's moving forward?
Yeah, I guess I don't have the exact statistic on the tip of my tongue, but it's some surprising statistic, like 40-odd% of adults in the U.S. are actually adopting fintech products. So my point there is it does feel like Americans or folks in the U.S. are open to new services and are actually maybe not demanding them, but using them in a way that will continue to help grow the market. In many regards, although Europe maybe had a head start in open banking or these challenger bank use cases, I think the economics of interchange and the U.S. payments system as it is today helps facilitate further growth in these areas. It's a lot of the freemium model for us to be more similar to Europe. I think all of these things will have to be discussed and figured out. There are constantly discussions around the networks and their egregious interchange rates, et cetera, and to Greg's point, if the future is on-us transactions, then all of this has potential to really go away. So regardless of where those sort of externalities go, I do think that in the US there's a lot of movement and energy and a lot of adoption at higher rates than even I expected. So I would say we're still pretty early. I think in the neobank space specifically, we actually see a lot of companies that are targeting specific demographics. And we all know that customer acquisition is actually the toughest piece. And so if you're going after a special group or a special demographic and you have a certain ability to capture that audience, it still feels like there's plenty of room to disrupt and to offer new products and services and better experiences for those users.
Yeah, that's an interesting take. I mean, I know that we know that Warren Buffett just put in close to $500 million in a neobank in South America, and that's getting more exposure just because of that. I mean, he was traditionally an investor in a lot of the big banks in the U.S. I think JP and perhaps Greg can give us an overview of what's happening there, because with Uphold you have a lot of international clients now, and that's growing rapidly. Greg obviously looks at early stage investments and looks at what institutions are likely to start looking at. The previous channel that we had with NFTs, Bitcoin, XRP, etc. So talk to us a little bit, JP, about what's happening globally that you see that's happening at Uphold. What does that look like? And then Greg, if you could add to what you're seeing as the new next thing, that'd be great.
Sure. So I think I think with I think there's a convergence happenening, and a lot of people are sort of running towards towards the middle. The neobanks, as they came out of, say, the UK, 5 years back, a couple have succeeded, but I think by and large they're sort of incrementalist solutions that are still reliant on fractional traditional banking. The edges are, hey, we've got a neat app, we don't have brick and mortar branches, but we're still a bank, so we're still a fractional reserve, and we still do the things that the banks do. And so I think that approach, while it is much more worn, well-tread path from a regulatory perspective, they're a little bit hamstrung in the breadth of things they can do. And there's certainly very little possibility of any of them jumping out of wherever they were born into becoming a global player. So it's a little bit looking at the future through lenses very much conditioned by the limitations of the past. I think as a sort of crypto native company trying to, again, go to the same territory, we have different challenges. The challenges are walking an entirely new and unexplored regulatory path that has a lot of people nervous and indecisive, and there's lots of gray areas. But that said, there's nothing about our model that's a limiter. We don't lend out our balance sheet. We're not subject to a lot of the rules that have governed banking and other parts of finance. And of course, by definition, we're tech first. So it's much easier for us at the end of the day to acquire a card company or participate in something that's been around than it is to be constantly integrating blockchains and trying to be inventive and at the vanguard of something. So if anything, I think there will end up being a fit between companies like ours and regional neobanks. We've been talking to a neobank actually that Greg introduced us to in Colombia. There are folks in Colombia that would love, in addition to the local peso, have access to gold and dollars and Bitcoin. They don't know how to do that. So that's how we would map into their local regulatory status and ability to act as a first and last mile into cash and into the local banking system. So that's one example of sort of where these two things meet. But I think, again, going back to, at this point, somewhat cliched notion that what we're seeing is the beginning stages of an internet of money. A lot of the constructs of the past are sort of happenstance, and they really, no longer speak to the possibilities enabled by new technology and by new consumer tastes and interests. There's no reason somebody should have a brokerage account and a bank account and a commodities account. All these things, when value becomes digital, can be converged into one portal where somebody can invest, borrow, spend, send, etc. So I'll pause there and hand over to Greg.
Greg, before you take over, there's a couple of questions here that relate to JP and his decision, or his executive team's decision to continue with XRP, despite all your exchanges and US delisting XRP from their platforms. That was a very bold move, JP, on your part and Uphold. And how did you make that decision? On what basis?
Sure. So, in a certain, well, really two reasons. One, we were very early with XRP, and so had developed a fairly large XRP constituency, and so out of some sense of loyalty to our base, as it were. And then secondly, by happy accident, we had been in what I'm pretty sure must be the world record process of negotiating a CMA with FINRA and the SEC, and in that exercise for 3 years, developed a very close relationship with a lawyer who actually used to be a part of the SEC, and so in consultation with this SEC personnel with whom we had an exceptional degree of trust, it was his view that it was the correct thing to do. In other words, even if an SEC complaint ultimately succeeded against a couple of individuals, to go from there to the declaration that XRP is a security today, is a world of difference and far less likely, because there's really no fundamental argument that would support that. So we took the view, supported by our lawyers, and again took the position that we felt would be the most helpful to our users. So far, I think it has been the correct decision. I guess we won't know now until October, from what I've been told. But we're comfortable with our decision.
Thank you so much for that answer. I mean, there's another question there, which you don't have to answer directly right now. But the other question is, when is Uphold going to think about a liquidity event, now or the near future? If you want to answer that now, you can, or you can also think about that for a second while Greg answers the issues about the other questions about security and about crypto and digital assets in that realm. And then after that, we'll go to DAI, who has a question. JP, you want to hold on to that answer, or do you want to answer it now?
Sure.
No, let him answer now.
Yeah. So the answer is we're thinking about it. I think that's about as much as I can say. But we're thinking about it.
Okay. Good answer. You must have a lawyer at your side there. Greg, talk about the security, about all the aspects that we're looking at. I mean, we had earlier on, we had Falcon X and we had Josh. We're talking about all these issues. As institutional investors, they're getting much more happy with heavier investing in various tokens and coins and digital assets. But there is still a little bit about security that needs to be addressed.
Well, yeah, I mean, there used to be a time when people would say, oh my gosh, you're investing in crypto, that's so risky. But now we live in a time where if you don't invest in some of these new, it could be crypto, it could be in new corridors like JP was talking about Colombia, it could be in industries that are like gaming industry that is kind of wild sometimes. Now it's kind of risky if you don't invest. And so people are like, it's like the definition of a hero is a coward that had no other options. And so we've moved to a world now where if you're not part of some of these things, you may just be missing out. And so even if you only allocate some 5% or 10% of your portfolio to these areas, that's a huge shift in the world. And so I was around for like when everybody said, oh, you have to invest in safe things. We lived through the financial crisis when all the bank valuations went to like zero, and I saw General Motors and Chrysler needing a bailout. Like the question of what is low risk is different now. And so I don't know how you don't, from a diversification point of view, have exposure to these industries, to these geographical corridors, to these asset classes, to these new ways of doing things. It would be imprudent to not have some exposure to those. And one of the things I always thought was just great about Uphold is Uphold's a conduit for doing those things. It might be like investing in carbon credits. Like they're all things that you can get to easily through something like Uphold. And through something like Apto, it helps you feel that all these things are liquid. And so you feel a lot less risk getting into something if you know you can get out of it. And so making everything super liquid, either because you can trade one thing for another, which you can do on Uphold, or you can spend anything anywhere that Visa and MasterCard are accepted, that just makes me a lot more comfortable going into realms that maybe 10 years ago looked risky. Now when I talk to people who look at me in the eye like that and they say, how can you do that risky stuff? And I'm like, how can you take the risk of not doing it? So it just means turning the hat around the other way on your head. So as far as I can tell, that's the world we're living in now.
Thank you, Greg. DAI, you've got the floor, and then we'll close it up from here.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
All right. Hey, JP, how are you?
Good. How are you?
You know, it looks to me like you have like an awesome new logo there in the background. Is that true?
Yes, I actually, I didn't mean to put it up, but there it was when I logged into Zoom.
It has a pre-IPO look to it.
Oh yeah, right.
But I've been watching the Link 2 SPVs on the platform the last few months, and every time they go up there, they sell like hotcakes at $6.75. So I'm back to that liquidity event question. What I'm wondering is, I just want to know, I know that you're limited, and if you need to tell the lawyers to get out of the room, I'm fine with that too. But I was just wondering, in a perfect world, how does this go down? Does Uphold go IPO, or do they get bought by someone? I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
You know, it's a good question. I think we would like to IPO in the sense that again, as Greg said, we feel it's pretty early innings. We feel we have a really good idea of where we'd like to go from here. And so creating an acquisition currency and a big pile of dry powder to accelerate that, growing through hiring and acquisition, that's our first choice. And I think the performance we've enjoyed for these past couple of quarters sets up very nicely for that. So if the world doesn't go totally nuts in the next 6 months or so, we'll be pursuing something in that realm.
Anyway, I love you. I just saw that you weren't watching the video.
It looks like you're on.
You said it's okay. And you
one of Elon's
it's so weird
there, but I like the background.
Well, I'm waiting for the rocket. I'm hoping to hear something from you. It's not just the XRP rocket. I can talk to Greg about that rocket. But I also like this Uphold rocket too.
Excellent.
Thank you. Closing statements before we go on to our next session. Greg, a couple of words, and then Meg, and then we'll close.
Well, I think Meg's got a hard stop, so I'm going to let her go first. Meg, did you want to recap just on?
I think Greg often, or in the past, he's asked me, like, if you weren't doing this, what would you do? And I just really don't have a good answer. I think what we're working on is really fun and exciting and moving in a really fast way, and I'm proud and excited to be a part of it. So hopefully we can make some change happen sooner rather than later.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Jay.
I just believe we're going to live in a world where everybody's going to have an identity. Everybody's going to have a digital wallet, whether it's custodial or non-custodial. So everybody's going to have a seat at the table. And now we have every color of chips because we can have stocks, we can have NFTs, we can have crypto, we can have fiat stable coins. So, like JP said, we're early on in the innings. The great thing about Uphold is, in addition to making it available to consumers, Uphold will, when it's fully in its full rendition, is going to have APIs so other people can build on top of that without having to go through the whole licensing and learning curve that Uphold is going through. And so my most exciting thing is that, and the big differentiator for Uphold from, like, say, Square or Revolut or Robinhood or Coinbase, is it's really a platform that others can build on. So you got a two-pronged strategy there. You got both the retail B2C strategy, but you also got B2B2C. That's really why I backed Uphold before, and I'm doubling down. And Apto plays a big part because it makes all that stuff interface with the MasterCard Visa world that we have today. And so we have both future rails as well as the link to the current rails. And I mean, that just seems like a good place to sit. I like the view, and I'm glad that Meg and JP are driving their respective vehicles.
Awesome, thank you so much. And with those words, link to, I'd like to introduce Bill Saris, CEO and co-founder of Link2, and Joy and Joe and also the CRO of Link2. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much for your participation. Apologies for running a little bit late, but glad you could join us. Hope you enjoyed Europe and Florida and San Francisco. We're going to talk to Bill and Joe, and the big task that you've heard from us all morning is how to identify and diversify your portfolio in pre-IPO companies. Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.